The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Winnetka, California, startling Violet Sanders awake from her restless slumber. For a moment, she lay frozen in her small bed, wondering if the sound had merely been another nightmare, the kind that had plagued her since that fateful day 6 months ago. The year was 1875, and in this unforgiving frontier town, death often arrived without invitation. Violet slid from beneath her worn quilt and moved to the window of her modest cabin on the outskirts of town. The sunrise had just begun to paint the horizon in hues of amber and gold, illuminating the rolling hills that surrounded the valley. Another shot rang out, confirming that what she'd heard was no dream. Hunting, perhaps, or trouble brewing at one of the saloons that had yet to close from the previous night's revelry. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back the familiar wave of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. At 25, Violet had already endured more than most women twice her age. The loss of her parents to influenza when she was just 18, followed by a hasty marriage to a man who'd promised protection but delivered only pain. Then came the robbery that had left her widowed, though she couldn't bring herself to mourn Thomas Sanders. His death had been a release of sorts, but it had left her with nothing but a small cabin and memories she wished she could erase. Knowing sleep would not return, Violet dressed quickly in a simple brown skirt and cream blouse. She pinned her long auburn hair into a practical bun and splashed cool water on her face from the basin beside her bed. Today was market day in Winnetka, and she needed to sell the preserves she'd prepared from her small garden if she hoped to make rent on the land where her cabin stood. As she gathered her jars and placed them carefully in a wicker basket, Violet considered her dwindling options. The bank had made it clear that her husband's debts exceeded the value of their meager possessions. She had 3 months to find a way to pay or lose everything. The thought of becoming homeless in a town where a woman alone was viewed either with pity or as an opportunity sent a shiver down her spine. The walk to town took nearly 45 minutes, and Violet used the time to rehearse her smile, the one she wore like armor when dealing with the townspeople. It never reached her eyes, but few noticed. Most were too preoccupied with their own struggles to recognize the hollow look that had taken residence in her gaze. Winnetka had grown considerably in the 5 years since Violet had arrived as a new bride. What had once been little more than a way station for travelers heading north to the goldfields had expanded into a proper settlement with a main street boasting 2 general stores, a bank, 3 saloons, a small church, and even a schoolhouse. The weekly market drew farmers and traders from miles around, creating a bustling atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the isolation of Violet's daily life. She set up her modest display at the far end of the market square, arranging jars of strawberry and blackberry preserves alongside her specialty, spiced apple butter that had earned a small but loyal following among the townspeople. The morning progressed slowly, with customers stopping occasionally to purchase a jar or two. By noon, she had sold less than half her stock and fought to quell the panic rising in her chest. This wouldn't be enough. Those preserves any good? A deep voice inquired, startling her from her calculations. Violet looked up to find herself staring into the most intensely blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man dressed in the practical attire of a cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal tanned, muscular forearms, and a dust-covered Stetson that had clearly weathered many seasons. His dark blonde hair curled slightly at his collar, and a short beard framed a square jaw that suggested both strength and stubbornness. "Best in the county," she replied automatically, falling back on the sales pitch she'd repeated countless times that morning. The apple butter won praise at last year's harvest festival. The stranger picked up a jar, examining it with genuine interest. I've been on the trail for 3 weeks. Can't remember the last time I had anything that didn't come from a can or wasn't cooked over a campfire. This would be a fine change then. Violet found herself studying his hands, strong and calloused, but surprisingly clean for a man who claimed to have been traveling. A thin scar ran across the back of his right hand, disappearing beneath his cuff. "I'll take 2 jars of the apple butter and 1 of the strawberry." He reached into his pocket and produced payment, adding, "And your name if you're willing to share it." The directness of his request caught her off guard. Most men in Winnetka knew better than to be so forward with a widow, especially one as reserved as Violet had become. Yet there was something refreshingly honest in his gaze, absent of the pity or predatory interest she'd grown accustomed to deflecting. "Violet Sanders," she said, accepting his money and carefully wrapping the jars in paper before placing them in a small sack. "And you are Owen Reynolds." He tipped his hat slightly. "Just arrived in town. Looking for work and a place that might appreciate a man with a decent arm for roping and a back that doesn't mind hard labor. The Dawson Ranch might be hiring. It's about 5 miles north of town." Violet handed him the package. "Mr. Dawson lost 2 hands to the lure of the silver mines last month." Owen nodded, accepting both the preserves and the information with a smile that transformed his weathered face, revealing a warmth that Violet found unexpectedly disarming. "Much obliged, Mrs. Sanders." He hesitated, then added, "I hope to see you around town." As he walked away, Violet realized she'd been holding her breath and exhaled slowly. There had been something in that brief exchange, something she couldn't quite name, that had awakened a feeling she thought long dead. Interest, perhaps, or simple curiosity about a new face in their small community. Whatever it was, she quickly dismissed it. Her life had no room for such indulgences. The remainder of the day passed without incident, and Violet sold enough to cover her immediate needs, though not nearly enough to make a significant dent in her debts. As she packed up her unsold goods, the familiar weight of anxiety settled once more upon her shoulders. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the now emptying market square, and Violet faced the prospect of the lonely walk home with growing unease. "Mrs. Sanders." The voice startled her for the second time that day. Owen Reynolds stood a respectful distance away, leading a chestnut mare. "I spoke with Dawson as you suggested. He's taken me on for a trial period." He gestured to the remaining jars in her basket. "Had any luck selling the rest?" "Some," she replied, not willing to admit how dire her situation had become. Pride was sometimes all she had left. "Enough." His expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he was polite enough not to challenge the lie. Instead, he nodded toward the setting sun. "It'll be dark soon. Would you permit me to escort you home? My horse can carry your goods, at least." Violet hesitated. Accepting help from a stranger went against everything her experience had taught her, but the prospect of the long walk in growing darkness made pragmatism win over caution. "That would be kind, thank you." As they left town, Owen leading his horse while Violet walked beside him, an awkward silence fell between them. The road stretched ahead, winding through groves of oak trees that had survived the region's periodic droughts. "How long have you lived in Winnetka?" he finally asked, breaking the tension. 5 years, though it sometimes feels longer." She kept her eyes on the path. "And you, where were you before this?" "Everywhere and nowhere," he replied with a slight smile. "Born in Texas, worked cattle drives up to Montana, did a stint mining in Colorado, even tried my hand at trapping in the territories." He patted his horse's neck affectionately. "Dixie here is the only constant companion I've had." "That sounds lonely," Violet observed before she could stop herself. Owen shrugged. "Freedom has its price, but lately I've been thinking there might be something to be said for putting down roots." He glanced at her. "What about your family? Do they live nearby?" The question, innocent as it was, struck a painful chord. "I have no family," she said simply. "My parents died years ago, and my husband—" She paused, unsure how to explain Thomas without revealing too much of herself. "My husband was killed in a robbery last year. I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, meeting those blue eyes again. There was no pity there, just a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "It was a difficult time," she acknowledged, the understatement almost making her laugh bitterly. The truth was far more complex: relief mingled with guilt, freedom tangled with fear. Thomas had not been a kind man, especially when the whiskey took hold, but his death had left her vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. They walked in silence for a while longer, the only sounds the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the dirt road and the occasional snort from Dixie. As they rounded a bend, Violet's cabin came into view, a modest structure nestled against a small copse of trees. "That's my home," she said, gesturing toward the cabin. Owen took in the sight: the well-maintained garden, the swept yard, the carefully mended fence, all testaments to Violet's determination to maintain dignity despite her circumstances. "You've made a nice place here," he observed, and she heard the genuine admiration in his voice. "It's simple, but it serves me well enough." She reached for her basket as they approached the gate. Owen handed it to her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact, slight as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through her hand that seemed to travel straight to her heart. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Reynolds." "Owen, please," he said. "And it was my pleasure, Mrs. Sanders." "Violet," she replied, surprising herself with the concession. He smiled, and for a moment they stood in the gathering dusk, an unspoken connection hovering between them like a tangible thing. Then Owen tipped his hat, mounted his horse with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to life in the saddle, and bid her good night. Violet watched him ride away until horse and rider disappeared into the deepening shadows. Only then did she turn and enter her empty cabin, feeling somehow more alone than she had before their encounter. The next 2 weeks brought a dramatic change to Winnetka's usually predictable rhythm. A band of outlaws had been terrorizing settlements along the California-Nevada border, and rumors placed them moving steadily westward. Sheriff Miller called a town meeting to discuss security measures, and for the first time in months, Violet found herself in the crowded meeting hall, standing near the back as the townsfolk voiced their concerns. "We need to organize a proper defense," declared Henry Dawson, the rancher who had hired Owen. "My men are willing to take shifts keeping watch." "And what of those who live outside town limits?" asked Alina Wright, an elderly widow whose farm lay even farther from town than Violet's cabin. "Are we to fend for ourselves?" The debate continued, growing heated at times, but Violet barely registered the arguments. Her attention had been captured by Owen's presence across the room. In the 2 weeks since their encounter, she had seen him only in passing, a distant figure on horseback, heading to the Dawson ranch, a glimpse through the general store window as she hurried past. Now, dressed in clean clothes with his hair still damp from a recent washing, he cut an impressive figure among the assembled men. As if sensing her scrutiny, Owen looked up, his gaze finding hers across the crowded room. He offered a small nod and what might have been the beginning of a smile before Sheriff Miller's voice rose above the clamor. drawing everyone's attention back to the matter at hand. "We'll establish patrols," the sheriff announced. "Volunteers will ride in pairs, covering the outlying properties. Those who live alone may want to consider staying with friends or relatives in town until this threat passes." A murmur swept through the crowd as people began discussing arrangements. Violet felt a flutter of panic. She had no friends close enough to impose upon, no relatives to offer shelter. The thought of abandoning her home, leaving it vulnerable to looters or worse, was unbearable. As the meeting dispersed, Violet slipped outside, needing air that wasn't thick with worry and fear. The night was cool, stars brilliant in a clear sky that seemed mockingly peaceful given the tension that had gripped the town. "Violet." Owen's voice came softly from behind her. "May I speak with you?" She turned, finding him standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand. "Of course." "I've volunteered for the patrol," he said. "Dawson assigned me the northern route, which includes your property." He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I understand your reluctance to leave your home, but I want you to know I'll be keeping a close eye on your place during my rounds." The offer of protection, delivered without presumption or expectation, caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very kind." "Not kindness," he corrected gently. "Just the right thing to do." Something in his tone, earnest, without a trace of the condescension she'd grown used to from the men of Winnetka, made Violet look more closely at Owen Reynolds. In the lamplight spilling from the meeting hall windows, his face revealed a complexity she hadn't fully appreciated before. Behind the confident exterior of a seasoned cowboy, she glimpsed something familiar, a shadow that suggested he, too, carried wounds not visible to the casual observer. "Have you eaten?" The question surprised them both, judging by the slight widening of his eyes. "Not since noon," he admitted. "I have stew at home." The invitation formed before she could reconsider it. "Simple fare, but hot and filling. You could accompany me back to my cabin, check the perimeter as you intend to during your patrols, and have a proper meal before you head to the ranch." A smile spread slowly across his face, transforming his features from handsome to nearly breathtaking. "I'd be honored, Violet." The walk to her cabin was different this time, less tense, filled with easy conversation as Owen told her about his first 2 weeks working for Dawson. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures of the cantankerous old rancher and the ragtag group of cowboys who formed his workforce. Violet found herself laughing for the first time in months, the sound almost foreign to her ears. At the cabin, Owen insisted on checking the surrounding area while Violet lit lamps and stoked the fire in her small stove. By the time he returned, pronouncing the property secure, the aroma of reheated stew filled the small space. "Smells like heaven," he declared, hanging his hat on a peg by the door and washing his hands in the basin she offered. They ate at her small table, the domesticity of the scene striking Violet as both strange and oddly comforting. Owen praised her cooking with such genuine appreciation that she felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the hearty stew. As they finished their meal, the conversation turned more personal. Owen spoke of his childhood in Texas, the son of a rancher who had lost everything in the war, forcing him to make his own way from the age of 16. He recounted adventures and misadventures with a self-deprecating humor that made even his hardships sound like grand experiences. "And you?" he asked finally. "What brought you to Winnetka?" Violet hesitated, absently tracing the grain of the wooden table with her fingertip. "My parents died when I was 18. Influenza took them within days of each other. I had an aunt in Sacramento who took me in, but her house was already crowded with her own children." She paused, memories washing over her. Thomas Sanders came through town on business. He was older, established, and seemed kind. When he proposed after just 2 weeks, my aunt encouraged the match. She didn't mention how quickly the kindness had faded once they were married, how isolation had become her prison as Thomas moved them to Winnetka. Far from anyone who might notice the bruises, she became adept at hiding. He wasn't what he seemed, Owen observed quietly, his perception unsettling her. Violet looked up, meeting his gaze directly. No, she admitted. He was not. Owen nodded, accepting her confirmation without pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. Life has a way of teaching us harsh lessons, he said. The trick is learning from them without letting them harden your heart completely. The simple wisdom in his words resonated deeply within her. She'd been fighting so hard to survive that she'd forgotten what it meant to truly live, to feel something beyond fear and resignation. It's getting late, she said finally, gathering their empty bowls. You should probably head back to the ranch. Owen stood, helping her clear the table despite her protests. Thank you for the meal, he said as he donned his hat. And the company. Both were more nourishing than you know. At the door he paused, turning back to face her. I'll be patrolling this area every evening, usually around dusk. If you need anything at all, hang a lantern on your porch. I'll see it and come. The promise held no expectations, no hidden agenda that she could detect. It was simply an offer of assistance, freely given. Good night, Owen, she said softly. Good night, Violet. He stepped into the darkness, the sound of his footsteps fading as he walked to where he'd left his horse tethered. Alone again, Violet moved about her small cabin, extinguishing lamps and banking the fire for the night. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the solitude felt less like a shield and more like an absence, a space waiting to be filled. The following days established a new pattern in Violet's life. Each morning she tended her garden and worked on household chores or preserving food for the coming winter. In the afternoons, she often walked to town, selling what she could at the general store and watching as Winnetka transformed under the threat of outlaw raids. Men carried weapons openly now, women traveled in groups, and children were kept close to home. True to his word, Owen rode past her cabin each evening, sometimes stopping briefly to report on the patrol or simply to exchange a few words. Occasionally, she invited him in for coffee or a meal, and these moments became bright spots in her otherwise solitary existence. They spoke of books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once held. Never did Owen push for more intimacy than she offered, and never did he treat her with anything less than complete respect. It was during one such evening, nearly a month after their first meeting, that the carefully constructed walls around Violet's heart began to crumble. They sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Owen had brought her a book, a collection of poetry he'd found in the general store, and the thoughtfulness of the gesture had left her momentarily speechless. My mother used to read poetry, he explained, a hint of color rising in his cheeks at her prolonged silence. Said it was a way to travel without leaving home. When I saw this, I thought of you, always asking about places I've been. Violet ran her fingers over the leather binding, touched beyond words. No one has given me a gift in years, she admitted. Thank you. It's nothing grand, he said with characteristic modesty. It's perfect. She looked up at him, seeing the genuine pleasure in his eyes at her appreciation. Something shifted inside her in that moment, a recognition that this man, with his quiet strength and unwavering kindness, had become important to her in ways she hadn't permitted herself to acknowledge. The realization frightened her. Owen, she began, not entirely sure what she intended to say, only knowing that the growing attachment between them needed to be addressed. "I'm not. I don't think I can be what you might want." He turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "And what is it you think I want, Violet?" The directness of his question left her floundering. "I'm assuming you eventually want what most men want: a wife, a family. And you believe you're unsuitable for such things." "I know I am," she said, the words emerging more forcefully than intended. "I'm damaged, Owen. Thomas may not have been a good husband, but I wasn't a good wife either. I couldn't give him children, couldn't be the woman he needed." The admission cost her dearly, exposing a vulnerability she'd guarded fiercely. Owen was quiet for so long that she feared she'd finally driven him away with her confession. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but she heard the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Did he tell you that? That you were inadequate?" Violet nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "And did he hurt you when you failed to conceive?" The question pierced straight to the heart of her shame. Thomas's disappointment had turned to cruelty, his hands becoming weapons as month after month passed without the pregnancy he demanded. "Yes," she whispered, the admission hanging in the air between them. Owen moved then, kneeling before her chair so that she had no choice but to look at him. "Listen to me, Violet. A man who raises his hand to a woman is no man at all. Whatever he told you about your worth, whatever he made you believe about yourself, was a lie meant to control you, to keep you small and afraid." Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision. "You don't understand," she insisted. "Something in me is broken, not just my body, but deeper. I don't know how to trust, how to love without fear. Even now, sitting here with you, someone who has shown me nothing but kindness, I'm terrified of what might happen if I let myself feel too much." "I'm not asking you to feel anything you're not ready for," Owen said gently. "I'm only asking that you stop punishing yourself for crimes you never committed." A sob escaped her then, the first crack in the dam she'd built around her emotions. "I'm broken inside, Owen," she whispered, the words torn from the deepest part of her soul. "Broken in ways I don't know how to fix." Owen reached out, taking her trembling hands in his strong, steady ones. "Then let me love the pieces," he said simply. "Let me show you that being broken doesn't mean being worthless." The tenderness in his voice undid her completely. Years of suppressed grief and fear poured out as Violet wept, her shoulders shaking with the force of her release. Through it all, Owen remained kneeling before her, his hands holding hers, anchoring her in the storm of her emotions. When at last her tears subsided, leaving her drained but somehow lighter, she became acutely aware of their position, her hands in his face tilted up to hers, eyes filled with a depth of feeling that should have sent her retreating in panic. Instead, she found herself drawn forward, closing the distance between them until their foreheads touched. "I don't know if I can be what you deserve," she murmured, "but I want to try." "That's all I'm asking," Owen replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Just a chance to show you what real love looks like: patient, kind, and without conditions." In that moment, on a porch bathed in the fading light of day, Violet Sanders took her first tentative step toward healing. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to Owen's. A kiss as fragile as a butterfly's wing but filled with the promise of possibilities neither had dared hope for. The peace of that evening was shattered 3 days later when the outlaws who had terrorized neighboring settlements finally descended upon Winnetka. Violet was in town, purchasing supplies at the general store, when the first shots rang out. The proprietor, Mr. Collins, immediately barred the door and ushered her and the other customers to the back room. "Stay down and stay quiet," he instructed, retrieving a shotgun from beneath the counter. "Sheriff Miller and his deputies have been preparing for this. They'll handle it." But the gunfire that followed, accompanied by shouts and the sound of breaking glass, suggested that the sheriff's preparations might not be sufficient against the number of raiders who had entered the town. Huddled in the dim back room with 3 other women and an elderly man, Violet felt the familiar grip of panic threatening to overwhelm her. "My children," whispered Mrs. Turner, a young mother whose 2 small daughters attended the town school. "They're at the schoolhouse." "The teacher will keep them safe," assured Mrs. Holloway, the blacksmith's wife, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. A crash from the front of the store indicated that the barred door had given way. Mr. Collins' voice rang out, ordering whoever had entered to leave, followed by the ominous click of his shotgun being readied. A laugh cold and menacing was the only response before a shot exploded through the tense air. Violet pressed herself against the wall, mind racing. The back door of the storeroom led to an alley. If they could reach it without being discovered, they might escape to the safety of the church or the sheriff's office. "We need to move," she whispered urgently to the others. "The back door we can slip out while they're occupied in the front." Mrs. Turner shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I need to get to my girls." "And you will," Violet assured her, surprising herself with her steady voice. "But first we need to get out of here alive." Taking charge seemed to come naturally in that moment of crisis. Violet led the small group to the rear exit, listening intently for sounds from the front of the store. She heard men's voices, at least 3 distinct speakers, as they ransacked the merchandise, seemingly having forgotten about the people who had fled to the back. Carefully, she eased the door open, relieved to find the alley empty. One by one, they slipped outside into the late afternoon sun. The main street was visible at the end of the alley, a scene of chaos as townsfolk ran for cover amidst sporadic gunfire. "The church," Violet decided, pointing to the white steeple visible above the rooftops. "It's the sturdiest building and close to the school. We can regroup there and figure out how to reach the children." They moved cautiously down the alley, staying close to the buildings and away from the open street. The sounds of the raid shouts, occasional gunshots, breaking glass provided a terrifying soundtrack to their escape. Just as they reached the end of the alley, a mounted outlaw thundered past, forcing them to press back against the wall. "We'll have to cross the street," Violet murmured once the rider had passed. "The church is just beyond those buildings." Mrs. Holloway clutched her arm. "I can't," she whispered. "My leg, I twisted it when we were running. I'll slow you down." Violet looked at the older woman's face, pale with pain and fear. "We're not leaving anyone behind," she said firmly. "Mr. Jenkins, can you help Mrs. Holloway? I'll lead the way." The elderly man nodded, supporting Mrs. Holloway as they prepared to make their dash across the exposed street. Violet counted silently, waiting for a lull in the chaos, then signaled for them to move. They had almost reached the safety of the opposite alley when a shout went up. "There, get them!" The crack of a rifle split the air, and dirt kicked up inches from Violet's feet. She pushed Mrs. Turner ahead of her, turning to see 2 mounted outlaws bearing down on their group. In that moment, time seemed to slow, each heartbeat stretching into eternity as Violet faced what seemed like certain death. Then another shot rang out different, closer, and one of the pursuers tumbled from his saddle with a cry. The second rider wheeled his horse around, searching for the source of the attack, only to be unseated by another precision shot. "Violet!" Owen's voice cut through her frozen panic. He appeared at the corner of the building, rifle in hand, his face grim with determination. "This way, quickly." They followed him through a narrow passage between buildings, emerging near the church where a group of armed townsmen had established a defensive position. Among them, Violet recognized Sheriff Miller and several of the Dawson Ranch hands. "The outlaws have split into groups," Owen informed them as they reached relative safety. "They're targeting the bank, the general store, and any businesses that might have valuables. Sheriff has men positioned to protect the school and the residential areas." Mrs. Turner clutched his arm. "My daughters, the children are safe," he assured her. Miss Parker barricaded them in the schoolhouse cellar at the first sign of trouble. Dawson and 2 of his best men are guarding the entrance. Relief washed over the woman's face, and Violet felt a surge of admiration for Owen's calm efficiency in crisis. He'd clearly been in the thick of the defense, yet had somehow spotted their vulnerable group and come to their aid. "Are you hurt?" he asked Violet, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "No," she replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded despite the terror still coursing through her. "We were in Colin's store when they broke in. I don't know if she couldn't finish the sentence. Owen's expression darkened. "Collins took a bullet, but he was alive when I passed by. Doc Stewart's tending to him and the other wounded at the hotel." A commotion from the direction of the main street drew their attention. Sheriff Miller raised his rifle, peering cautiously around the corner of the church. "They're pulling out," he reported, disbelief evident in his tone. "Heading east and in a hurry." The suddenness of the raiders' departure was puzzling until a new sound reached their ears, the rhythmic pounding of many horses approaching from the west. Within minutes, a company of U.S. cavalry appeared, their blue uniforms a welcome sight to the beleaguered townsfolk. The raid was over almost as quickly as it had begun, though its effects would linger long after the outlaws had fled and the cavalry had moved on in pursuit. 3 townspeople had been killed, including young Deputy Wilson, who had been among the first to confront the raiders. Several more were wounded, though Doc Stewart believed most would recover with proper care. As dusk fell, Violet found herself working alongside other women to prepare food for those who had taken refuge in the church. The building had become a temporary shelter for families whose homes had been damaged, or who simply feared returning to isolated properties, while the threat of the outlaws' return remained. Owen appeared at her side as she distributed bowls of hastily prepared stew, his face smudged with dirt and smoke but his eyes bright with relief at finding her unharmed. "You should stay in town tonight," he said quietly. "It's not safe to return to your cabin until we're certain all the raiders have been captured or driven far enough away." Violet nodded, too exhausted to argue even if she had wanted to. The events of the day had drained her completely, leaving her numb and disoriented. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, suddenly concerned about his plans. "Don't worry about me," he said with a tired smile. "Dawson's men are taking shift standing watch. I'll get some rest when my turn is done." A wave of emotion, gratitude, fear, and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name washed over her. "You saved our lives today," she said simply. Owen shook his head. "You were already saving yourselves. I just provided a little covering fire." He reached out, briefly touching her hand. "You're stronger than you know, Violet Sanders." The quiet confidence in his voice stirred something within her, a flicker of belief that perhaps he was right, that beneath the layers of fear and doubt lay a strength she had yet to fully recognize. As the night deepened, and most of the refugees settled into makeshift beds throughout the church, Violet found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The day's events replayed in her mind, each moment of terror accompanied by the realization of how close she had come to death and how much she suddenly wanted to live. She slipped outside, needing fresh air and a moment of solitude to process the tumult of her thoughts. The church's small garden provided a peaceful retreat, illuminated by the silver light of a nearly full moon. Taking a seat on a stone bench, Violet gazed up at the star-filled sky, finding comfort in its vastness and permanence. "Couldn't sleep?" Owen's voice came softly from behind her. She turned to find him approaching, his tall figure silvered by moonlight. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "That's natural after what you experienced today. The mind needs time to make sense of danger once it's past." "It's not just that," Violet said, the words coming more easily in the darkness. "I realized something when those men were shooting at us, when I thought I might die." "What's that?" She turned to face him, finding courage in the gentle anonymity of shadow. "I realized I wasn't ready to die because there's too much I haven't lived yet. For years, I've been existing, not living, just moving from one day to the next without hope or joy." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Today showed me how precious life is, how quickly it can end. I don't want to waste another moment being afraid of what might happen if I open myself to possibilities." Owen remained silent, letting her speak, but she felt the intensity of his attention like a physical presence between them. "You asked me for a chance," she continued, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "A chance to show me what love can be. I'm still scared, Owen. I still carry wounds that haven't fully healed, but I want that chance for both of us." He reached for her then, his hand finding hers in the darkness. The warmth of his touch traveled up her arm, settling somewhere in the vicinity of her heart. "I have wounds too," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Things I've seen, mistakes I've made that haunt me still. I'm not offering perfection, Violet. Just honesty, respect, and a promise to never deliberately cause you pain." The simplicity of his pledge moved her deeply. In a world where nothing was certain, where danger could appear without warning and lives could be upended in moments, such a promise was both modest and profound. Violet leaned toward him, resting her head against his shoulder. Owen's arm came around her, holding her gently as they sat in companionable silence beneath the vast canopy of stars. For the first time in years, she felt something that had long been absent from her life: hope, fragile but undeniable, blooming like a desert flower after rain. The aftermath of the raid brought significant changes to Winnetka. With 3 citizens dead and several businesses damaged, the town council voted to increase the sheriff's budget for deputies and to establish a permanent volunteer patrol system for outlying properties. The cavalry officers who had driven off the raiders promised more regular patrols through the area, though everyone knew their resources were stretched thin across the vast frontier. For Violet, the weeks following the attack marked a period of profound transformation. Her relationship with Owen deepened gradually, built on conversations that often lasted deep into the night as they shared their histories, dreams, and fears. He spoke of his father's alcoholism and eventual suicide after losing the family ranch, of his mother's struggle to hold the family together, of his own wanderings in search of something he couldn't name until he found Winnetka and her. In turn, Violet revealed the full extent of her marriage to Thomas: the isolation, the verbal abuse that had escalated to physical violence, the crushing weight of blame he placed on her for their childlessness. Speaking these truths aloud, seeing them reflected in Owen's compassionate gaze rather than dismissed or denied, began a healing process she hadn't known was possible. 2 months after the raid, on a crisp autumn evening, Owen arrived at Violet's cabin with an unexpected proposal. "Dawson's offering me a permanent position," he said as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset. "Foreman of the North Range, with the use of a cabin that's standing empty since his previous foreman moved to Oregon." Violet felt a pang of disappointment. The Dawson Ranch was nearly an hour's ride from her property, which would mean seeing much less of Owen than she had grown accustomed to. "That's wonderful," she said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "You deserve the recognition." Owen turned to her, his expression serious. "The thing is, I told him I needed to discuss it with you first." "With me?" Violet's heart quickened. "Why would your job decision depend on me?" "Because," he said slowly, reaching into his pocket, "I'm not planning to live in that cabin alone." He withdrew a small object and held it in his palm, a simple gold band that caught the last rays of sunlight. "This was my mother's. Before she died, she made me promise I'd only give it to a woman I loved with my whole heart, a woman I intended to honor and cherish for all my days." Violet stared at the ring, unable to speak as tears filled her eyes. "I know it's soon," Owen continued, his voice betraying a rare nervousness. "I know you're still healing, still finding your way back to yourself. I'm not asking for an immediate answer or a rapid wedding. I'm asking if you'll consider a future with me, on whatever timeline feels right to you." The tears spilled over then, running unchecked down Violet's cheeks. "Owen, she struggled to find words equal to the moment, to the depth of what she felt for this man who had shown her patience and respect when she needed it most. "If you need time," he began, but she stopped him, placing her fingers gently against his lips. "I don't need more time," she said, her voice steadying. "These past months have shown me exactly who you are, Owen Reynolds. You've seen me at my most vulnerable, heard my darkest confessions, and never once made me feel less worthy because of them." She took a deep breath. "I love you. Yes, I'll marry you whether it's next week or next year. I want a future with you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Owen slid the ring onto her finger, its size surprisingly perfect, as if it had been waiting all along for her hand. "I love you, Violet Sanders," he said, pulling her into his arms, "with everything I am and everything I hope to be." Their kiss sealed the promise, tender at first, then deepening as Violet allowed herself to embrace not just Owen but the possibility of happiness she had thought forever beyond her reach. They married 3 weeks later in Winnetka's small church, with the entire town turning out to witness the union. Violet wore a dress of pale blue silk that a leaner Wright had insisted on ordering from Sacramento, declaring that every bride deserved something special regardless of circumstance. Owen, standing tall and proud in a new black suit, watched with undisguised adoration as she walked toward him, a small bouquet of autumn wildflowers clutched in trembling hands. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with Reverend Thompson speaking eloquently about love's power to heal and transform. When it came time for their vows, Owen surprised Violet by reciting words he had written himself. "I take you, Violet, not as a possession but as a partner. I promise to walk beside you rather than ahead or behind, to listen when you speak and hear what remains unspoken, to protect without controlling, to cherish without confining. In your strength I find inspiration, in your vulnerability sacred trust. Whatever life brings, we will face together the joys and sorrows, victories and defeats as equals bound by love and respect." Violet, moved beyond words, could only respond with the traditional vows, though she infused each phrase with the depth of feeling that had grown between them over the preceding months. The celebration that followed was the most joyous Winnetka had seen in years. Tables laden with food filled the town square. Musicians played well into the night, and even the most skeptical citizens agreed that the union of the quiet widow and the newcomer Cowboy seemed blessed with unusual promise. As evening fell and lanterns were lit throughout the square, Owen led his bride in their first dance as husband and wife. Holding her close, he whispered in her ear, "Happy." Violet looked up at him, at the face that had become beloved in ways she had never imagined possible. "More than I knew was possible," she admitted. and a little afraid of how much I feel. Fear is natural when something matters deeply, he said, understanding as always. But we'll face it together, the fear and the joy, the uncertainty and the hope. Together, she agreed, the word no longer frightening but comforting, a promise of shared burdens and multiplied joys. Later that night, as they rode toward the cabin on Dawson's property that would be their home, Violet felt a complex mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Her previous marriage had left her with painful associations regarding intimacy, wounds that still needed healing. Owen, sensitive to her unspoken concerns, had promised patience, assuring her that love could wait until trust was complete. But as he carried her across the threshold of their new home, lit only by moonlight filtering through curtainless windows, Violet realized that she wanted this night to be a true beginning, unburdened by the shadows of her past. "It's not much yet," Owen apologized, gesturing to the sparsely furnished main room. "Dawson's wife sent over some basics, but we'll need to make it our own over time." "It's perfect," Violet said, taking in the solid construction, the clean lines, the potential for creating a real home. "It's ours." The simple declaration seemed to hang in the air between them, laden with meaning that transcended the physical structure around them. Owen set her gently on her feet but kept his arms loosely around her waist. "Violet," he began, his voice low and serious. "I meant what I said about patience. Tonight and every night the choice is yours. We have a lifetime ahead of us." In response, she reached up and touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the slight roughness of evening stubble beneath her fingertips. "I choose to begin our life together completely," she said softly. "I trust you, Owen, with my heart, with my body, with everything I am." His eyes darkened at her words, but still he hesitated. "Are you certain?" Instead of answering verbally, Violet rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed her decision more eloquently than words could have done. Owen responded with restrained passion, his hands remaining respectfully at her waist even as the kiss deepened. It was Violet who took the next step, guiding one of his hands to the buttons at the back of her dress. "Help me," she whispered against his mouth. With infinite care, Owen complied, his fingers deftly unfastening the long row of buttons. As the dress loosened, Violet felt a moment of vulnerability, remembering the harsh criticism Thomas had often directed at her body. But when Owen's gaze met hers, she saw nothing but wonder and desire, pure, uncomplicated appreciation that banished the ghosts of her past. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, helping her step out of the dress and carefully laying it across a nearby chair. "Every part of you." In the soft glow of the single lamp he had lit, Violet stood before her husband in her simple undergarments, feeling not exposure but liberation. Owen's reverent gaze healed something within her that had been damaged by years of criticism and neglect. "Your turn," she said with newfound confidence, reaching for the buttons of his shirt. Together they undressed each other, each revelation of skin met with gentle touches and murmured appreciation. When at last they stood bare before each other, Owen lifted Violet into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, where a large bed clearly new and specially purchased for their arrival dominated the small space. "I want this to be good for you," he said, as he laid her on the clean sheets. "Promise you'll tell me if anything doesn't feel right." The concern in his voice, the prioritization of her comfort and pleasure, moved Violet deeply. "I promise," she said, drawing him down beside her. "But Owen, it already is right because it's with you." What followed was a revelation for Violet, an initiation into physical intimacy, as it was meant to be, characterized by mutual giving and receiving, by respect and tenderness, rather than demand and submission. Owen's patience allowed her to discover her own desires, to participate actively rather than endure passively. When their bodies finally joined, the sense of completion, of rightness, brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" Owen asked immediately, concern replacing passion in his expression. "Yes," she assured him, smiling through her tears. "These are happy tears. I never knew it could be like this, so beautiful, so connected." Relief and joy transformed his features as he began to move with her, establishing a rhythm that built slowly, allowing pleasure to gather and expand between them. Violet felt herself opening not just physically, but emotionally, the last barriers around her heart dissolving in the heat of their shared passion. When release came for both of them, it was not merely physical satisfaction, but a spiritual communion, a mutual surrender that bound them together more completely than legal vows or public ceremonies ever could. Afterward, lying in the circle of Owen's arms as their breathing gradually slowed, Violet experienced a sense of peace unlike anything she had known before. The broken pieces of her life, of her very self, seemed to rearrange into a new pattern different from what had been before but whole in its own way, stronger perhaps for having been remade with such care. "What are you thinking?" Owen murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Violet smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I'm thinking about pieces," she said. "About how something broken can be transformed into something new and beautiful in the right hands." Owen tightened his embrace, understanding the deeper meaning beneath her words. "The Japanese have an art form called kintsugi," he said. "When pottery breaks, they repair it with gold, believing that the piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken. The gold seems tell the story of its healing, make it unique." "Is that what you're doing with me?" Violet asked, raising herself on one elbow to look into his face. "Filling my broken places with gold? No," Owen replied, his eyes serious. "I'm simply loving the pieces until you can see that they were always valuable, always worthy with or without the gold." He touched her face gently. "The breaks are part of your story, Violet, but they don't define you." In that moment, something shifted within her, a final release of shame and inadequacy that had clung to her soul even through the healing of recent months. She saw herself through Owen's eyes, not damaged goods but a complex, resilient woman who had survived betrayal and abuse with her capacity for love intact. "Thank you," she whispered, the words insufficient but heartfelt. Owen smiled, understanding what she couldn't fully express. "Sleep now," he said, pulling the blankets over them both. "Tomorrow is the first day of our life together." As Violet drifted toward sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, she felt a profound sense of homecoming, not to a place but to herself, to the woman she was always meant to be before fear and circumstance had intervened. The years that followed their wedding night were not without challenges. The cabin needed extensive work to transform it into a proper home, and Owen's position as foreman demanded long hours, especially during roundup and branding seasons. Violet found herself adapting to the rhythms of ranch life, learning to manage a household that occasionally included feeding hungry cowboys when work kept them near the North Range. 6 months into their marriage, a harsh winter storm struck the region, bringing freezing temperatures and heavy snow that isolated their cabin for nearly 2 weeks. During those days of enforced seclusion, Violet discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that brought both joy and anxiety given her history of believing herself barren. "Are you certain?" Owen asked when she shared the news, his expression a mixture of delight and concern. "As certain as one can be without a doctor's confirmation," she replied, her hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen. "I've missed my monthly cycle twice now, and I'm experiencing the same symptoms my mother described when she was carrying my younger brother." Owen knelt before her chair, placing his large hand over hers. "A child," he said wonderingly. "Our child." The awe in his voice dispelled some of Violet's fears. Unlike Thomas, who had viewed conception as her obligation rather than a shared miracle, Owen clearly saw the potential baby as a gift, an extension of their love rather than proof of her worth. "I'm afraid," she admitted, determined to maintain the honesty that had become the foundation of their relationship. "What if something goes wrong? What if my body can't?" Owen soothed, pressing his lips to her hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together. If this pregnancy continues, we'll celebrate each day. If not, we'll grieve together and try again when you're ready. Either way, you are enough for me, Violet. With or without children, you are my family." The sincerity in his eyes, the unshakable acceptance in his voice, eased a fear that had lived in Violet's heart for years, the fear that her worth as a woman, as a wife, depended on her ability to produce children. As it happened, the pregnancy progressed normally despite Violet's concerns. Dr. Stewart, making one of his bi-monthly visits to outlying properties, confirmed her condition and pronounced her in excellent health. By summer, her condition was visible to all, earning congratulations from the ranch hands and gifts of hand-sewn baby clothes from the women of Winnetka. Owen became even more protective, though he was careful not to smother her independence. He arranged for a young woman from town, Jenny Wilson, to stay with Violet when his duties took him away overnight, ensuring she was never completely alone as her time approached. On a brilliant September morning in 1877, after 18 hours of labor during which Owen never left her side despite the midwife's initial protests, Violet gave birth to a healthy son. As she held the tiny, red-faced infant against her chest, exhaustion gave way to a fierce, overwhelming love unlike anything she had ever experienced. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, his voice rough with emotion as he gazed at his son. "Look what we made, Violet." They named him William, after Owen's father, with the middle name James in honor of Violet's father. The baby thrived, growing strong on his mother's milk and flourishing under the adoration of both parents. Owen proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son or changing soiled linens as he was breaking horses or managing ranch hands. Life settled into a new pattern centered around William's needs and milestones. Violet found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had imagined, each day bringing new discoveries as the baby's personality began to emerge. When William was 8 months old, Mr. Dawson suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to manage the day-to-day operations of his ranch. His wife, childless and overwhelmed by the sudden responsibility, turned to Owen with an unexpected proposition. "Stanley and I have discussed this at length," Mrs. Dawson explained during a visit to their cabin. "We want to offer you a partnership in the ranch, not just as foreman but as a part owner with the opportunity to buy a larger share over time." Owen, stunned by the offer, looked to Violet for her reaction. She nodded slightly, encouraging him to consider the possibility that had appeared so unexpectedly before them. "It's a generous offer," he said carefully, "but why me? You have relatives who might expect such an opportunity." Mrs. Dawson sighed, her tired face showing the strain of recent months. "Stanley's nephews have made it clear they're not interested in ranching. One's a banker in San Francisco, the other practices law in Sacramento. Neither has visited in years." She straightened in her chair, determination evident in her posture. "This ranch has been our life's work. We wanted to continue under someone who respects what we've built, someone with the skill and vision to carry it forward. The discussion continued late into the evening, with details of the proposed arrangement laid out and examined from all angles. By the time Mrs. Dawson departed, the framework of an agreement had been established, one that would gradually transfer ownership of the Dawson Ranch to Owen over a period of 10 years, with provisions for the elder Dawson's care and security in their declining years. That night, as Violet nursed William before placing him in his cradle, Owen sat beside them, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think?" he asked softly, not wanting to disturb the drowsy baby. "It's a big decision, one that affects all of us. If we accept, we'd eventually move to the main house. Our children would grow up there." Violet smiled at his use of the plural children, recognizing his subtle way of indicating that he hoped for more. "It's an amazing opportunity," she said. "The Dawson Ranch is the largest in the county, with the best water rights and grazing land. But more than that, I think it's right for us. You've proven yourself as foreman. This is the natural next step." Owen reached out, gently touching William's downy head. "I want to build something lasting," he admitted. "Something to pass on to him and maybe his brothers and sisters someday. A legacy." The word resonated with Violet. A legacy was exactly what Thomas had denied her the chance to create, not just children but a life with meaning and continuity, connections that extended beyond her own limited span of years. "Then we should accept," she said decisively. "We'll make it work together." The agreement was formalized the following week, with appropriate legal documents drawn up by a lawyer from Sacramento. News of the arrangement spread quickly through Winnetka and surrounding areas, meeting with general approval. Owen had earned respect during his time as foreman, known for fair dealings with both the ranch hands under his supervision and the merchants and cattle buyers with whom he conducted business. The transition occurred gradually over the next 2 years. Owen assumed increasing responsibility for the ranch's operations, while Mr. Dawson, though physically diminished by his stroke, continued to offer valuable advice and insights from his decades of experience. Violet, meanwhile, found herself taking on a new role as she helped Mrs. Dawson manage the social aspects of their position as prominent ranchers. Shortly after William's 2nd birthday, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought pure joy rather than anxiety, her successful first experience having laid many of her fears to rest. Owen's reaction was equally enthusiastic, and even William seemed to understand something momentous was happening, patting his mother's still flat stomach with curious hands while she explained that a baby brother or sister was growing inside. The pregnancy progressed smoothly until the 7th month, when Violet awoke one night with sharp pains and alarming bleeding. Owen, frantic with worry, rode for the doctor while Mrs. Dawson stayed with Violet and the frightened William. Dr. Stewart arrived just before dawn, his examination confirming what Violet already feared: she was in premature labor, the baby coming too early to survive without extraordinary intervention. For hours, she fought against her body's determination to expel the child, following the doctor's instructions with desperate precision. By midday, it became clear that their efforts were failing. The baby, a tiny, perfect girl, was born just after 2 o'clock, drawing only a few weak breaths before her spirit departed. Owen cradled his daughter's body, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he whispered a blessing and farewell. The grief that followed was profound, a shadow that dimmed the bright life they had been building. Yet unlike the isolating sorrow Violet had experienced in her first marriage, this loss was shared, the burden carried by both. Owen never once suggested blame or disappointment, instead creating space for her to express the complex emotions that accompanied their bereavement. They named the baby Elizabeth and buried her on a gentle slope overlooking the ranch, marked by a small stone angel that Owen commissioned from a stonemason in Sacramento. In the weeks that followed, they often walked there together at sunset, sometimes with William riding on his father's shoulders, too young to fully comprehend the significance of the place, but sensing its importance to his parents. "I want to try again," Violet said one evening as they stood by the grave, spring wildflowers nodding in the gentle breeze. "Not to replace her, nothing could ever do that, but because I refuse to let fear rob us of the family we both want." Owen pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Are you sure? There's no rush, Violet. We have time." "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that still came easily these days. "Elizabeth will always be part of us, but life continues. I want to embrace that, not hide from it because it might bring more pain." The courage in her words, the resilience she demonstrated daily in the face of grief, only deepened Owen's love and respect for the woman who had become not just his wife but his partner in every sense. By the following spring, their hearts had begun to heal, though Elizabeth remained a precious memory honored through quiet remembrances on her birth date. Life at the ranch continued its forward momentum, with Owen implementing new breeding techniques that promised to improve their stock and Violet establishing a small school for the children of ranch employees, teaching basic reading, writing, and arithmetic 3 mornings each week. William, now 3, was a bright, curious child who shadowed his father whenever possible and delighted in helping his mother with household tasks. His presence was a constant reminder of life's persistence, of joy that could coexist with sorrow. In the summer of 1880, Violet gave birth to healthy twin boys Robert and Thomas, though the latter was quickly nicknamed Tom to distinguish him from the painful memories associated with her first husband. The twins' arrival transformed their household, bringing both exhaustion and exhilaration as they adjusted to the demands of 2 infants plus an active preschooler. Owen proved invaluable during this period, arranging his work schedule to be present as much as possible and hiring additional household help to ensure Violet wasn't overwhelmed. His tenderness with the babies, his willingness to walk the floor with a colicky Tom or change Robert's diaper without complaint, reinforced what Violet had long since recognized, that in Owen Reynolds, she had found not just a husband but a true partner who viewed their family as a shared creation rather than her sole responsibility. By the time the twins celebrated their first birthday, the transition of ranch ownership was nearly halfway complete. Mr. Dawson's health had declined further, confining him primarily to the main house where he still held court from his wheelchair, dispensing advice and telling stories of the ranch's early days to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Dawson, though physically stronger than her husband, had begun to express a desire to move to Sacramento to be nearer her sister, particularly during the harsh winter months. "We should consider taking over the main house," Owen suggested one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching William chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while the twins slept inside. "It makes sense with 3 boys who will only get more active. Besides, it would allow the Dawsons to travel without worrying about the property." Violet nodded, recognizing the practicality of the suggestion despite her attachment to the cabin that had been their first real home together. "The boys would have more room to grow," she agreed. "And it would be closer to the operations center of the ranch." The move took place that autumn, timed to coincide with the Dawsons' first extended visit to Sacramento. The main house was a substantial two-story structure with 6 bedrooms, a formal dining room, a study, and a large kitchen with adjoining pantry. Though undeniably more comfortable than their cabin, it initially felt strange to Violet, too grand, too formal for the simple life she had come to cherish. Owen sensed her discomfort and encouraged her to make changes that would transform the imposing house into a home that reflected their family's character, rather than the more formal style the Dawsons had preferred. Gradually, Violet rearranged rooms, replaced heavy draperies with lighter fabrics, and filled the previously austere spaces with evidence of Children Williams' drawings proudly displayed. The twins' toys stored in decorative baskets, family photographs in simple frames on previously barren walls. By Christmas of 1881, the transformation was complete. The house had become unmistakably theirs, comfortable, welcoming, designed for a growing family rather than social impression. When the Dawsons returned from Sacramento for the holiday, even Mrs. Dawson approved of the changes, noting that the house felt lived in for the first time in years. The holiday celebration that year marked a turning point in Violet's life. Surrounded by her healthy sons, her husband whose love had only deepened through shared joys and sorrows, and friends from both the ranch and town who gathered for a Christmas feast, she experienced a moment of perfect contentment, a recognition that the broken young woman who had once whispered, "I'm broken inside," had not merely been repaired but transformed. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep in their beds, William in his own room decorated with cowboys and horses, the twins sharing a nursery down the hall, Owen found Violet standing by the window in their bedroom, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape, illuminated by a brilliant winter moon. "Happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed on their wedding night years before. Violet turned to him, her face serene in the silver light. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she answered truthfully. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, our life." Owen crossed to her, taking her in his arms with the same reverence he had shown from the beginning, though familiarity had deepened their physical connection rather than diminishing it. "I knew from the first moment I saw you at that market stall," he said, his voice low and intimate. "Something in your eyes called to me, not just beauty, though you were and are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. It was strength, Violet, strength you couldn't see in yourself yet, but it was there, waiting to be recognized." She smiled at the memory of that first meeting, so distant now yet vivid in her recollection. "I thought you were just being kind to the sad widow selling preserves," she teased. "I was being selfish," he corrected, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress with practiced ease. "I wanted to see you smile, to be the reason for it." As clothing gave way to bare skin, as they moved to the bed they had shared for years, Violet marveled at how desire had not faded with time but matured, becoming richer and more complex with each passing season. Their lovemaking that night was both familiar and new, a celebration of what they had built together and a promise of what was yet to come. Afterward, lying in the comfortable silence that only true intimacy can produce, Violet traced the lines of Owen's face, lines that had deepened slightly with the passing years, with responsibility and occasional worry, but also with laughter and joy. "Do you remember what you said to me that night on my porch?" she asked softly. "When I told you I was broken inside," Owen nodded, his eyes serious in the dim light. "I said I would love the pieces." "You did more than that," Violet said, her voice thick with emotion. "You taught me to love them too, to see that the broken places weren't shameful or defining, just part of a larger whole." He drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That's the secret most people never learn," he murmured. "That wholeness isn't the absence of breaks, but the integration of all our parts, the joyful and the painful, the strong and the vulnerable. As she drifted toward sleep in the safety of her husband's embrace, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the frightened, isolated widow who had believed herself irreparably damaged to the confident woman who now managed a household, taught children, and loved fully without reservation, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it hadn't been a miracle, she realized, but rather the patient work of Owen's love, certainly, but also her own growing capacity to love herself, to recognize her inherent worth beyond what any man, cruel or kind, might bestow or withhold. The pieces that had once seemed broken beyond repair had not disappeared. They remained part of her, integrated into the woman she had become. But like the Japanese pottery Owen had described on their wedding night, the lines of those breaks now shimmered with gold, the gold of experience transformed by love into wisdom, of pain alchemized into compassion, of fear transmuted into courage. As sleep claimed her, Violet's last conscious thought was not of the past but of the future, a future bright with promise, rich with possibility, and secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges might come, she would face them not as a broken woman, but as one made stronger by having been broken and loving remade. In the years that followed, the Reynolds family continued to prosper. The Dawson Ranch, gradually becoming known as the Reynolds Ranch as ownership fully transferred, expanded its operations under Owen's visionary leadership. By 1885, they had established one of the first breeding programs for Angus cattle in the region, a move that initially raised eyebrows but ultimately proved immensely profitable as demand for the superior beef grew throughout California and beyond. Violet's role evolved as well. What had begun as informal lessons for ranch children developed into a proper school, housed in a building Owen constructed specifically for that purpose. With proper desks, a small library of donated books, and eventually a young assistant teacher from San Francisco, the Reynolds Ranch School became known for educational excellence that rivaled the town's facilities. William, growing into a thoughtful young man with his father's height and his mother's contemplative nature, showed an early aptitude for both ranching and academics. By age 10, he was already helping with basic ranch operations while devouring any book he could get his hands on. The twins, different as night and day despite their identical beginning, brought complementary energies to the family. Robert methodical and detail-oriented, Tom exuberant and creative. In 1886, their family expanded once more with the birth of a daughter they named Grace, whose arrival was heralded as especially precious given their earlier loss. Unlike her boisterous brothers, Grace was a quiet, observant child who seemed to absorb the world around her with unusual intensity. Owen doted on his only daughter, and even the boys, initially dubious about a sister, quickly became her devoted protectors. Life was not without its challenges. The severe drought of 1888-1889 tested even the most established ranches, forcing difficult decisions about herd reduction and water conservation. A financial panic in 1893 briefly threatened their expanding operations when several banks failed, including one holding a significant portion of their operating funds. William contracted scarlet fever at age 16, spending weeks hovering between life and death, before finally turning the corner toward recovery. Through each crisis, the partnership between Violet and Owen provided a stable foundation that allowed the family to weather adversity without fracturing. Their love, which had begun as a tender shoot growing from rocky soil, had developed deep roots and a sturdy trunk capable of bending without breaking when storms arose. By the turn of the century, with California firmly established as part of a modernizing nation, the Reynolds Ranch had become one of the most successful agricultural enterprises in the state. William, now a college graduate with innovative ideas about scientific farming methods, had married Eleanor Davis, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, bringing new energy and connections to the family business. The twins, at 21, had chosen different paths, Robert pursuing a law degree in San Francisco, while maintaining his interest in the ranch's financial operations. Tom exploring his artistic talents while managing the horse breeding program his father had established. Grace, at 14, showed promise as both a student and a horsewoman, winning ribbons at regional competitions with the quiet determination that characterized everything she attempted. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1900, Owen surprised Violet with a journey to Europe, a 3-month grand tour that would take them from London to Paris, Rome to Vienna, fulfilling a dream she had expressed years earlier but never expected to realize. William and Eleanor would manage the ranch in their absence, a testament to Owen's confidence in his eldest son's capabilities. The night before their departure, they hosted a celebration that brought together family, ranch employees, and friends from throughout the county. Under a canopy of lanterns strung across the ranch's expansive courtyard, with tables laden with food and a small orchestra brought from Sacramento for the occasion, Owen raised a glass to the woman who had transformed his life. 25 years ago, he began, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet gathering, I met a woman selling preserves in the Winnetka market. I bought apple butter, but what I really acquired that day was a glimpse of my future, though I didn't know it yet. His gaze found Violet, standing nearby in a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her still auburn hair, now threaded with silver at the temples. They say that time reveals truth, Owen continued. In our case, time has revealed what I suspected from our first conversation, that Violet Sanders was the most courageous, compassionate, and remarkable person I would ever have the privilege to know. He raised his glass higher. To my wife, my partner, my best friend who taught me that loving someone means embracing all of them, not just the easy parts. Cheers erupted from the assembled guests, but Violet barely heard them. Her eyes locked with Owen's across the space between them, a space that seemed to contract until it contained only the two of them despite the crowd. In his gaze, she saw the same tenderness, the same unwavering belief in her that had been there from the beginning, a constancy that had allowed her to grow beyond the limitations of her past into the fullness of who she was meant to be. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and their children had retired to their respective rooms, Violet and Owen stood on the balcony outside their bedroom, looking out over the ranch that had become the physical manifestation of their shared vision. Did you ever imagine this? Violet asked, gesturing toward the sprawling property with its modern buildings, extensive pastures, and orchards that stretched to the horizon. When you rode into Winnetka that day, did you see any of this coming? Owen smiled, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting comfortably on top of her head. Not specifically, he admitted, but I knew I was looking for something or someone that would transform wandering into purpose. The moment I saw you, something clicked into place. Violet leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his body behind hers. For me, it was slower, she said thoughtfully. I was so afraid of being hurt again, so convinced that damaged things stayed damaged. And now, Owen's breath stirred her hair, his hands gentle on her waist. Turning in his arms to face him, Violet saw the boy he had been in the man he had become, the same clear blue eyes, the same quiet strength, now deepened by decades of shared experience. "Now I know that the most beautiful things are often those that have been broken and lovingly reassembled," she said. "Like us." Owen's kiss was both familiar and thrilling, comfort and passion intertwined in the perfect balance they had achieved through years of learning each other's needs and desires. As they moved inside to the bedroom they had shared for so long, Violet reflected on the extraordinary journey from that first hesitant touch to this confident dance of bodies that knew precisely how to please and be pleased in return. Their lovemaking that night held both celebration and promise, acknowledgement of all they had built together and anticipation of adventures yet to come. As they lay afterward in contented exhaustion, Violet traced the scar on Owen's hand that she had first noticed during their initial meeting, now so familiar she rarely consciously registered it. "What are you thinking?" he asked, the question an echo from their wedding night long ago. Violet smiled, pressing a kiss to his palm. "I'm thinking about that frightened young widow who believed she was too broken to be loved," she said. "And how glad I am that a certain stubborn cowboy refused to accept her assessment." Owen chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "Not stubborn," he corrected, "just perspicacious enough to recognize value others had overlooked." "Such a fancy word," she teased. "My husband, the secret intellectual." "Only because my wife is the schoolteacher," he retorted, his hand moving in a caress along her spine that still, after all these years, sent shivers of pleasure through her body. "Had to improve my vocabulary just to keep up with her." Their gentle banter continued until sleep began to claim them both. As consciousness faded, Violet found herself reflecting on the phrase that had marked the beginning of their journey together. "I'm broken inside," she had whispered, exposing her deepest fear. "Then let me love the pieces," Owen had replied, offering not pity but partnership in the work of healing. What neither of them had fully understood then was that the loving would transform both lover and beloved, that the pieces would reassemble into something stronger and more beautiful than what had existed before. Their story begun in pain and uncertainty, but developed through patience, respect, and unwavering commitment had become a testament to love's power not merely to comfort, but to recreate, to take what was shattered and forge it into something enduring. As dawn broke over the Reynolds ranch, painting the eastern sky with the promise of a new day, Violet and Owen slept peacefully in each other's arms, no longer a broken woman and a wandering cowboy, but partners in a life they had built together, one careful piece at a time.